Hello, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at missiles in the Star Wars universe, such as the Proton torpedo, ion torpedo, and concussion missiles. It's interesting because they serve different roles within space battles, but really, this begs the question, which is the most effective in ship-to-ship combat? And out of the three, which is the best option? That and more we'll cover in today's video. Hello everyone, it's Marcos, and as I stated earlier, we're going to compare different missiles used by starfighters and some capital ships, what they're capable of, and what they're most effective at. Keep in mind, as we talk about these missiles, I'll be drawing from both canon and legends, with some of the legends missiles later in the video. I do want to go ahead and apologize for my fridge in the background that y'all might or might not hear. It's a very low grain noise, so yeah, I've been trying to play around with the audio to make my voice louder, but when I make it louder, the fridge kind of ramps up. So yeah, just a little disclaimer there. I apologize. That's why the audio is so low. I did lower the intro, however, as you might have already heard. But yeah, let's get back to it. First, we'll examine proton torpedoes. Now, proton torpedoes were high-yield proton scattering energy warheads. And what that essentially means is that they detonated with a large release of explosive energy. Proton torpedoes were usually carried by X-Wing, Y-Wing, and B-Wing series starfighters, including the TIE bomber line used by the Empire. There is one point that I want to clarify in regards to shielding for capital ships. Capital ships tend to have two types of shielding. Particle shielding, which aids the hull of a ship to deflect physical objects such as micrometeors across the entire hull by reinforcing the molecular bonds of the hull plating. And we can see here that it doesn't quite work for such large meteors, whereas ray shielding more permeated the hull, enveloping the vessel in layers of energy. This shield could extend from the hull by millimeters or even centimeters. The destructive power of a single warhead was more than enough oftentimes to obliterate a starfighter and inflict significant damage on capital ships. That being said, however, due to the physical nature of the proton warhead, particle shielding would usually stop proton torpedoes, but bypass ray shielding. Of course, as would be expected, fighters like an X-Wing can only carry so many proton torpedoes, which is to say that they can't carry many at all, whereas a more dedicated bomber like a Y or B-Wing can deliver heavier payloads. In most cases, proton torpedoes are depicted as cone in shape with a red-white hue, with the exception of the proton bombs utilized by the Imperial TIE bombers as seen during an episode of Rebels. A couple times that proton torpedoes have been used include the Battle of Yavin 4 when the Death Star was, deleted, and during the invasion of Naboo, when a young Anakin Skywalker, after performing the good trick of spinning, blew up a Trade Federation control ship with a pair of well-placed proton torpedoes. Finally, the Great Purge of Mandalore, where proton bombs were used once again. It was just an incredible loss, to be honest, and an atrocity rivaling the destruction of Alderaan, to a lesser extent, of course, in the sense that the planet is still at least in one piece and not pieces. Next, we'll take a look at concussion missiles. Similar to proton torpedoes, this cylindrically shaped projectile was tipped with an explosive warhead and could bypass ray shields from smaller vessels to large capital ships, but yet again would be stopped by a particle shield. Originally, these missiles were designed to be used in atmosphere, effectively delivering, as the name suggests, a rather concussive force. Concussion missiles, however, vary in speed, maneuverability, and destructive capability, typically offering much better tracking/homing systems than proton weapons, with those deployed from starfighters having a lesser yield than the exponentially more potent assault concussion missiles fired from capital ships, such as those used by the Victory 1 class Star Destroyers. Usually, pilots would fire these missiles in pairs, with the first missile intended to damage deflector shields and armor plating, allowing the second missile to deal direct damage to the now vulnerable target. Notable fighters that we usually see with these missiles include the RZ-1A wing, the Imperial missile boat, and even TIE interceptors when retrofitted onto the fighter. Lando, for example, fired a concussion missile at the reactor core of the second Death Star at the Battle of Endor, after Wedge had already weakened the shield projector with a proton torpedo. And games like TIE Fighter often allowed the player to equip the ship with concussion missiles and other types of ordnance before a mission, whereas a more modern game like Star Wars Outlaws only gives 3 options, with the standard loadout being concussion missiles. Lastly, we'll take a brief look at ion torpedoes, which had a similar homing system to proton torpedoes, but instead of being nuclear in nature, they carried an intense ion charge. Ion weaponry, for those who may not yet know, deliberately overwhelmed the electronics, subsystems, and shielding of the intended target, crippling anything from starfighters to even capital ships, such as when we see Gold Squadron disable and immobilize the Imperial Star Destroyer Persecutor at the Battle of Scarif. Out of lore, I understand why we don't simply see as many ion torpedoes. It would kind of just ruin the fun if anyone just kind of disabled every single ship, but in lore we can only assume that ion weapons capable of crippling starfighters instantly and other vessels that are quite larger can be quite expensive. When it comes down to it, everything depends on the type of starcraft which you use. A combination of both ion weaponry and something more explosive such as proton warheads or concussion missiles would be the best combination. You need some weaponry to disable the shields of your target, and then a weapon powerful enough to deal significant damage to the enemy's hull. Of course, anything like an ion missile or torpedo is completely unnecessary against a TIE fighter as they don't have any shielding. Regular ion lasers would be enough if you wanted to just simply disable the engines or other subsystems. I did want to state a couple of honorable mentions in the missile world before we close up the video for today. Discord missiles, nope, not that kind of Discord, this kind of Discord. Vulture droids and tri-fighters often carried these incredibly high velocity missiles, which when detonated would release about 7 to 22 buzz droids. And these little guys are the absolute worst. I mean, they are called sabotage droids for a reason, and just yikes. They're dangerous when it comes to getting rid of starfighters, but you would need a substantial amount of them to do any sort of damage to a capital ship or smaller vessel of the sort. The Hex missile used prior to the Clone Wars was essentially a highly dangerous chemical warhead capable of taking out an entire large-scale city with its toxin. The Intruder missile is this torpedo-shaped missile, which would see use in the Galactic Civil War by the Rebel Alliance, and it was said to be highly effective at overloading a capital ship's shield generator, causing them to explode, damaging the rest of the ship in the process. Well, I think that's about all we have for today. If you enjoyed, I'd highly appreciate it if y'all left a like and subscribed, so you don't miss out on more lore videos. And may the Force be with you, always.